The desert wind carried no mercy that afternoon, only heat and the promise of violence. Sheriff Garrett stood in the town square of Redemption Gulch, his badge catching the harsh sunlight like a warning. Before him, 3 women balanced on wooden crates, ropes coiled around their necks, hands bound tight. The executioner waited, axe ready to kick the crates away. The crowd gathered thick, but silent. Fear had taught them to watch injustice without protest. The charges were theft. 3 sisters accused of stealing cattle from the most powerful rancher in the territory, Marcus Dane. Everyone knew the truth. Dane wanted their land, a fertile stretch along the river where water ran year-round. The sisters had refused to sell. Now they would hang for a crime they never committed. The oldest sister, Catherine, stood tall despite the rope. Her eyes swept across the crowd, not pleading, but remembering faces. Beside her, Margaret trembled but did not cry. The youngest, Sarah, whispered prayers that the winds stole away before they reached heaven. The sun beat down mercilessly on the assembled townspeople. Sweat ran in rivulets down dusty faces. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, not fully understanding what they were witnessing but sensing the wrongness of it all. Old men who'd seen too many frontier injustices shook their heads but said nothing. The saloon had emptied, the general store stood abandoned, even the blacksmith had ceased his hammering. All of Redemption Gulch had gathered to watch 3 innocent women die. Sheriff Garrett raised his hand. The moment stretched thin as wire. The executioner positioned himself near the crates, ready to kick them away with one swift motion. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, not in fear but in resignation. She'd fought as hard as she could, hired what lawyers would take the case, presented evidence of her family's innocence. None of it had mattered. Marcus Dane's gold spoke louder than truth in this territory. Then hoofbeats thundered from the east, urgent and fast. A rider emerged from the shimmering heat, dust rising behind him like smoke. He rode straight into the square without slowing, his horse scattering the crowd. People stumbled backward, some falling in their haste to avoid being trampled. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, weathered, with a face carved by sun and hardship. His clothes were simple, worn leather vest, faded shirt, boots that had walked 1,000 miles. But his eyes burned with something the town had forgotten, righteous fury. "This stops now," he said. His voice carried across the square, quiet but absolute. Sheriff Garrett's hand moved toward his gun. "Whoever you are, stranger, this is legal business." The judge passed sentence. "Judge Harlow is in Dane's pocket. Everyone knows it." The stranger's gaze moved to the 3 women, then back to Garrett. "I have evidence that proves their innocence. Witnesses who saw Dane's men brand those cattle in the dead of night, then move them to the sisters' land." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Garrett's face darkened. "You're calling the judge corrupt?" "I'm calling him what he is. A coward who sells justice to the highest bidder." The stranger pulled a folded paper from his vest. "These are sworn statements from 2 ranch hands who quit working for Dane because they couldn't stomach his methods anymore. They'll testify. Won't matter if you're dead." The voice came from behind. Marcus Dane pushed through the crowd, flanked by 6 armed men. He was thick-set, prosperous, his clothes too fine for a man who claimed to work cattle. "Sheriff, arrest this man for interfering with justice." The stranger didn't flinch. "Is that what you call this? Justice?" Dane smiled, cold and certain. "Those women are thieves. The law says they hang. The law says they get a fair trial. They got a farce." The stranger's hand rested near his holstered gun, casual but ready. "I'm taking them." "You and what army?" "Just me." The square fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Dane's men spread out, hands hovering near their weapons. The stranger stood alone, outnumbered 7-1, with half the town watching and the other half pretending not to see. Catherine's eyes fixed on the stranger, trying to understand why someone would risk his life for people he'd never met. There was something in his bearing, in the set of his shoulders, that spoke of a man who'd lost everything and found a reason to fight again. She wanted to tell him to leave, to save himself, but the rope around her neck made speech nearly impossible. Then something unexpected happened. An old man stepped forward from the crowd, a farmer with calloused hands and bent back. "I'll stand with him," he said. His voice shook, but he stood firm. A woman joined him, then another man. Within moments, a dozen townspeople had moved to stand near the stranger, forming a human wall between Dane's men and the gallows. They had no guns, no power, but they had numbers and desperation. Dane's face flushed red. "You're all making a mistake." "The only mistake," the stranger said, "was letting you run this town for so long." The confrontation hung balanced on a knife's edge. Dane's men looked nervous now, their confidence shaken by the crowd's unexpected solidarity. They were hired guns, comfortable with intimidating the weak, but facing down angry townspeople was different. These people had reached their breaking point. Sheriff Garrett, reading the shifting mood of the crowd and calculating his own survival, slowly lowered his hand from his gun. "Maybe we should hear what those witnesses have to say before we do something we can't undo." Dane's eyes blazed with fury, but he recognized defeat when it stared him down. "This isn't over," he snarled, then turned and stalked away, his men following. The stranger moved to the gallows. He cut the ropes from the women's necks with swift, sure strokes, then freed their hands. Catherine rubbed her throat, the red marks already darkening to bruises. "Who are you?" "Name's Thomas Webb. I was passing through, heard about the hanging." He didn't mention that he'd ridden 3 days without stopping to get here in time. "Why help us?" Margaret asked. "You don't know us." Thomas looked at the 3 sisters, seeing in their faces echoes of his own lost family, a wife and daughter taken by cholera 5 years past. "Because someone should." The crowd dispersed slowly, the tension ebbing but not gone. The old farmer approached Thomas. "You made an enemy today. Dane doesn't forget. I've had enemies before." Thomas helped Sarah down from the platform. She was the youngest, barely 20, and her legs nearly gave out when she touched solid ground. Catherine steadied her sister. "We owe you our lives. That's a debt we can't repay. Don't want payment. Just want you safe." Thomas glanced toward the edge of town where Dane had disappeared. "But we need to move fast. He'll regroup, maybe try something tonight when there's no crowd to witness." "Our ranch is 10 miles north," Catherine said. "But it's not safe. Dane's been trying to force us out for months." "Then we don't go to your ranch. We go somewhere he won't think to look." Thomas untied his horse, a sturdy roan that had carried him across half the territory. "There's an abandoned mining camp in the hills 3 hours' ride. We can hole up there, plan our next move." Margaret touched his arm. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Thomas met her eyes, saw the genuine question there. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And I know what it's like when nobody stands up to stop it." He swung into his saddle. "Now we need to move." The sisters had no horses. Dane had impounded them as evidence, so Thomas arranged for borrowed mounts from sympathetic townspeople. Within an hour, they were riding north into the hills, leaving Redemption Gulch behind as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The trail wound upward through scrub oak and juniper, the air growing slightly cooler as they climbed. Thomas led, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain for signs of pursuit. Catherine rode beside him, her posture straight despite exhaustion. Behind them, Margaret and Sarah spoke in low voices, their shock gradually giving way to the realization that they'd survived. "How did you know about the mining camp?" Catherine asked. "Worked there 6 years ago, before the silver played out. It's isolated, easy to defend if it comes to that." Thomas guided his horse around a boulder. "And it's the last place Dane would think to look." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. The sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and red, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. "You said you lost everything," Catherine said quietly. "What happened?" Thomas was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice flat and controlled. "I had a wife and daughter. Emma and Grace. 5 years ago, cholera swept through our town. I was away on a cattle drive, trying to make money for a better life. By the time I got back..." He paused, swallowing hard. They'd already been buried 2 days. Catherine's hand moved to touch his arm, a gesture of shared grief. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I swore I'd never be too late again. When I heard about your hanging, I rode hard as I could. Nearly killed my horse getting here." "Thank God you did," Margaret called from behind. "Another few minutes and—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew how close it had been. The mining camp appeared as darkness fell, a cluster of weathered buildings tucked into a narrow canyon. Thomas checked each structure carefully before allowing the women inside. The main bunkhouse was in the best condition, with a functional stove and enough intact furniture to be comfortable. "It's not much," Thomas said, "but it's shelter." Catherine looked around the dusty interior, at the cots with torn mattresses and cobwebs thick in the corners. "It's more than a grave." They spent the evening making the place livable. Thomas found firewood and started a small blaze in the potbelly stove. Margaret discovered a cache of canned goods left by the last miners: beans, peaches, coffee. Sarah swept the floors and hung blankets over the broken windows to hide the firelight. The work helped distract them from the horror of what they'd nearly experienced. As darkness settled completely and they gathered around the stove, the full weight of the day began to press down on them. Sarah started to cry, quiet tears that she tried to hide. Margaret held her, stroking her hair. Catherine stared into the flames, her face hard as stone, but her hands trembled slightly. Thomas sat apart, giving them space to process their trauma. He cleaned his gun methodically, checking the ammunition, ensuring the weapon would fire true if needed. The familiar ritual calmed his thoughts. He'd done this same task countless times during the war, preparing for battles that might come with dawn. "You fought in the war?" Catherine's voice broke the silence. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Which side? Does it matter now?" Thomas holstered the gun. "Maybe not. But it tells me something about who you are." "Union. 3rd Cavalry." He met her gaze without flinching. "I fought because I believed in something. Turned out war destroys what you believe in, piece by piece, until you're just trying to survive." Catherine nodded slowly. "And after?" "Drifted. Took whatever work I could find: cowhand, scout, guard on wagon trains. Tried to forget what I'd lost." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Didn't work. Some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try." Margaret spoke up from where she sat with Sarah. "What made you ride so hard to reach us? The farmer said you nearly killed your horse getting to Redemption Gulch in time." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of burning wood. 5 years ago, I had a wife and daughter. Cholera took them in the space of a week. I was away, working a cattle drive in Colorado, trying to make money for a better life for us. Thought I was doing the right thing, being a good provider." His voice remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes, old pain never fully healed. "I got home too late. They'd already died. I couldn't save them. Couldn't even say goodbye. Just stood over their graves and felt like the world had ended." The fire crackled in the heavy silence that followed. "After that, I didn't care much about living," Thomas continued. "Went through the motions, but inside I was already dead. Took dangerous jobs, picked fights with men who could have killed me, hoped maybe I'd join Emma and Grace. But I was too good at staying alive." He looked up at the 3 sisters. "Then I heard about your hanging. 3 innocent women about to die because they stood up to a bully with money and power. Something in me woke up. I realized I had a choice: keep waiting for death, or fight for something that matters. You gave me a reason to live again." Sarah wiped her tears, her young face solemn. "We're glad you chose to fight." "So am I," Thomas said quietly. "So am I." The conversation drifted into silence as exhaustion caught up with them all. They arranged sleeping areas, Sarah and Margaret taking 2 of the cots while Catherine insisted on taking first watch. Thomas went outside to check the perimeter, walking the canyon rim in the darkness, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The stars blazed overhead in their thousands, undimmed by any town lights. Thomas stood for a moment, breathing the cool night air, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. For so long he'd been adrift, a man without moorings. Now he had something to fight for again. 3 lives that mattered. A cause that was just. When he returned to the bunkhouse, Catherine was still awake, sitting by the dying fire. She looked up as he entered. "You should sleep," Thomas said. "I'll take watch." "Can't sleep yet. Too much running through my head." She gestured to the space beside her. "Sit with me?" Thomas settled onto the wooden bench, feeling the weariness in his bones. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the embers glow. "Tell me about them," Catherine said softly. "Your wife and daughter." Thomas hesitated, then found himself speaking. "Emma was the strongest person I ever met. Smart, funny, could outshoot most men and never back down from a challenge. We met during the war. She was running a field hospital, saving lives while I was taking them. After it ended, we married and tried to build something good from all that destruction." "And your daughter?" A smile touched Thomas's lips, sad but genuine. "Grace was 6 when she died. Had her mother's eyes and her mother's spirit. She wanted to be a doctor, help people like Emma did. Asked me 1,000 questions about everything: why the sky was blue, where birds went in winter, how you could tell if someone was honest just by looking at them." He paused, the smile fading. "She would have made a difference in the world. They both would have." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "You honor their memory by what you did today. By choosing to save lives instead of taking them. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just selfish, trying to make up for not being there when they needed me most." "It's not selfish to care about others." Catherine turned to face him fully. "You risked your life for 3 strangers. That's the opposite of selfish." Thomas met her eyes and saw genuine warmth there, not pity but understanding. "What about you? How did 3 sisters end up with a ranch valuable enough for Marcus Dane to commit murder to get it?" Catherine's expression hardened. "Our parents built that ranch from nothing. Spent 30 years turning raw land into something productive. Our father died 2 years ago. Heart gave out during a hard winter. Our mother followed 6 months later. Just couldn't live without him. They left the ranch to the 3 of us, equal shares. We've been running it ever since." "And Dane?" "Started making offers almost immediately. Low offers, insulting really. When we refused, the offers got worse. Then the threats started. Cattle disappeared, fences got cut, one of our barns burned down. When that didn't work, he fabricated the theft charges." Catherine's hands clenched into fists. "He's not used to anyone telling him no. In his mind, if he wants something, it should be his. The law is just a tool to get what he wants." "Men like that," Thomas said, "they don't stop until someone makes them stop. Which is why you're here. Which is why I'm here." They sat together as the fire burned down to coals, finding comfort in shared silence. Eventually, Catherine's eyelids grew heavy and Thomas convinced her to sleep. He took over the watch, sitting by the window with his gun across his lap, alert for any sound that might signal danger. The night passed without incident, but Thomas knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Dane wouldn't accept defeat so easily. He'd regroup, plan, come at them from a different angle. Men with that much power and that much to lose were the most dangerous kind. As dawn broke, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold, Thomas began to formulate a plan. They couldn't hide forever. Eventually, Dane would find them, or they'd run out of supplies, or winter would come and trap them. They needed to go on the offensive, to gather evidence so damning that even Dane's bought judges and sheriffs couldn't ignore it. When the sisters woke, Thomas laid out his thoughts. "We need to take the fight to Dane. Not with guns, but with the truth. We find everyone he's wronged, everyone he's threatened. We gather testimony, documentation, anything that proves his crimes. Then we take it to the territorial governor in Santa Fe." Margaret shook her head. That's 2 weeks' travel, maybe more. Dane will hunt us down before we get halfway. Not if we're smart about it. Not if we move fast and stay ahead of him. Thomas poured coffee from the pot on the stove. I've spent 5 years running from my past. I'm done running. Sometimes you have to stand and fight, even when the odds are against you. Sarah, the youngest, spoke up hesitantly. But how do we get people to testify? They're all terrified of Dane. We give them a reason to be more afraid of staying silent, Catherine said, her voice firm. We show them that Dane can be beaten, that he's not invincible. What Thomas did yesterday in the town square, that showed people that someone was willing to stand up to him. We build on that. Exactly. Thomas agreed. Fear is Dane's greatest weapon. We take that weapon away. They spent the morning planning, identifying potential witnesses and allies. Thomas revealed that before riding to Redemption Gulch, he'd already spoken to 2 former Dane ranch hands who'd quit in disgust over their employer's methods. They'd signed statements detailing crimes they'd witnessed. That evidence was hidden in a safe location, but it was just the beginning. We need more, Catherine said, studying the rough map they'd drawn in the dirt outside the bunkhouse. More witnesses, more documentation. Enough that Dane can't possibly intimidate or kill everyone who knows the truth. There's a bookkeeper in Redemption Gulch, Margaret offered. Mr. Peterson. He does accounts for most of the ranchers in the area, including Dane. He's an honest man, always seemed uncomfortable with some of the transactions he was processing. Good, Thomas said. Anyone else? The previous sheriff, Sarah added. Before Garrett. He got run out of town 2 years ago when he tried to investigate Dane. Last I heard, he was living in Silver Creek, about 40 miles west. They compiled a list of 7 potential witnesses, people who had knowledge of Dane's crimes or who had been victimized by him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I'll go back to Redemption Gulch, Thomas said. Talk to Peterson, retrieve the statements I already have. You 3 stay here where it's safe. No. Catherine's voice was absolute. We're in this together. You don't take all the risk while we hide. She's right, Margaret added. We've been running scared for months. I'm done with that. If we're going to fight, we fight together. Thomas looked at the 3 sisters, saw determination in their faces that hadn't been there before. Yesterday they'd been victims, waiting helplessly for death. Today they were survivors, ready to take control of their fate. All right, he conceded. But we're smart about it. We don't all go into town at once. Catherine and I will go. We're the best shots if things go wrong. Margaret, Sarah, you stay here and keep watch. If we're not back by sunset, you ride for Silver Creek and find that former sheriff. It took another hour to finalize the details. Thomas and Catherine would approach Redemption Gulch from the north, avoiding the main road. They'd enter town separately, meet at the bookkeeper's office, then retrieve the hidden statements before returning to the mining camp. As they prepared to leave, Thomas checked his weapons carefully. His revolver was clean and loaded, and he carried a rifle across his saddle. Catherine had borrowed a gun from one of the townspeople who'd helped them escape, older model but well-maintained. You know how to use that? Thomas asked. Catherine gave him a look. I grew up on a ranch. Been shooting since I was 8 years old. I can hit a target at 200 yards. Thomas nodded, appreciating her confidence. They mounted up as the sun reached its zenith, the day already hot and getting hotter. The ride back toward Redemption Gulch took 2 hours. They stayed off the main trails, following deer paths and dry creek beds. The landscape was harsh but beautiful. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like ancient monuments, scrub brush clung to life in impossible places, and hawks circled overhead on thermal currents. As they rode, Thomas found himself increasingly aware of Catherine's presence beside him. She sat her horse with natural grace, her eyes constantly scanning the terrain for threats. There was a strength to her, a core of iron that yesterday's near-death experience hadn't broken. If anything, it had forged her into something harder and more determined. What are you thinking? She asked, catching him looking at her. That you're tougher than most men I've known. A faint smile touched her lips. Ranch life doesn't leave room for weakness. You learn to be strong or you don't survive. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, the silence of two people beginning to trust each other. They left the horses in a grove of cottonwoods about a half-mile from town, proceeding on foot. The plan was for Catherine to enter from the east, Thomas from the west, converging at Peterson's office, which sat on a side street away from the main thoroughfare. Thomas waited 10 minutes, giving Catherine time to get into position, then walked toward town. The afternoon heat was oppressive, and few people moved on the streets. He kept his head down, hat pulled low, trying not to draw attention. Peterson's office was a small wooden building with a faded sign. Thomas checked the street, clear, then slipped inside. The interior was dim, and cluttered with ledgers and papers. An elderly man with spectacles sat at a desk, pen in hand, and looked up startled at Thomas's entrance. "Mr. Peterson?" Thomas kept his voice low. The bookkeeper's eyes widened. "You're the one who stopped the hanging yesterday. Word is Dane has put a price on your head. $500. That much? I'm flattered." Thomas moved to the window, checked the street again. "I need information about Dane's financial dealings. Proof of his crimes." Peterson's hands shook slightly. "I could lose everything. My business, maybe my life. Or you could do what's right. Help stop a man who's terrorized this whole territory." Before Peterson could respond, Catherine slipped through the back door. She tied a scarf over her distinctive hair, but her bearing was unmistakable. "Miss Catherine," Peterson breathed. "I heard, we all thought. We survived," she said simply. "Mr. Peterson, I know you've seen things in Dane's accounts. Payments that don't add up, transactions that should have been reported to the territorial government. We need those records." The bookkeeper was silent for a long moment, war between fear and conscience playing across his face. Finally, he stood and moved to a locked cabinet. His hands fumbled with the key, but eventually he pulled out a leather portfolio. "These are copies," he said. "I made them months ago, when I started to suspect what was really going on. Payments to judges, falsified land transfers, bribes to territorial officials. It's all here." Thomas took the portfolio, feeling its weight. This was it, the evidence that could bring Dane down. "Why make copies?" Catherine asked. Peterson's laugh was bitter. "Insurance. I thought if Dane ever threatened me, I could use these to protect myself. But I'm an old man, and I'm tired of being afraid. Use them. End this." "Thank you," Thomas said. "This takes courage. Courage would have been speaking up months ago. This is just doing what I should have done all along." They were preparing to leave when the sound of approaching horses froze them all. Thomas moved to the window and cursed under his breath. 6 riders had pulled up outside, Dane's men, heavily armed. "Back door," Thomas whispered urgently. But before they could move, the front door crashed open. 2 of Dane's gunmen entered, weapons drawn. The lead man, a scarred brute with dead eyes, smiled coldly. "Well, well. The little bird and her new friend, all in one place. Dane's going to be pleased." Thomas's hand moved toward his gun, but the odds were bad. 2 men in front, likely more covering the exits. Any shooting would end with someone dead, probably Peterson, who was standing frozen behind his desk. "Easy," Thomas said. "No need for violence. Too late for that. You embarrassed Mr. Dane yesterday. Made him look weak. Can't have that." The gunman gestured with his pistol. "Portfolio. Hand it over." Thomas calculated the angles. If he drew, he might take down one man before the other shot him. Catherine had positioned herself slightly to the side. She had a chance at the second gunman if Thomas created an opening. But it was risky, and Peterson would likely die in the crossfire. The decision was made for him. A gunshot exploded from somewhere outside, followed by shouts and more gunfire. The 2 gunmen spun toward the door, distracted. Thomas moved. His pistol cleared the holster in a fluid motion, the shot catching the lead gunman in the shoulder. The man went down screaming. Catherine fired simultaneously, her bullet shattering the second man's gun hand. Go! Thomas shoved Catherine toward the back door while he covered their retreat. More of Dane's men were pouring into the street now, drawn by the gunfire. They burst out the back door into an alley. The gunfire from the street continued. Someone was creating a diversion. Thomas saw a flash of blue uniform and realized the territorial marshal's patrol must be in town. He and Catherine ran, weaving through back alleys and side streets toward where they'd left the horses. Behind them, shouts and gunfire echoed, but the sound was moving away. The marshal's men were drawing Dane's forces into a running fight. They reached the horses, mounted quickly, and galloped away from town. Thomas kept the portfolio tucked inside his vest, one hand on the reins and one ready to draw his gun if necessary. They didn't slow until they put 2 miles between themselves and Redemption Gulch. Finally, Thomas pulled up in a small canyon, both of them breathing hard. That was close, Catherine gasped. Too close. Peterson? I don't know. The marshal's men were there. Maybe they protected him. Thomas hoped so. The bookkeeper had taken a tremendous risk helping them. Catherine suddenly laughed, a release of tension that bordered on hysteria. Did you see their faces when you shot? They weren't expecting resistance. They expected us to be easy targets. They were wrong. Thomas allowed himself a slight smile. You shoot well under pressure. Told you I could handle myself. They rode on toward the mining camp, taking a circuitous route to confuse any potential pursuit. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting and Margaret and Sarah were pacing anxiously. Thank God, Margaret breathed when she saw them. We heard distant gunfire. Thought the worst. There was trouble, Catherine admitted. But we got what we needed. That night, they spread out the contents of Peterson's portfolio by lamplight. The evidence was damning, ledgers showing illegal land transfers, receipts for bribes, even a list of problems solved, with dates that matched suspicious deaths in the territory. This is enough, Thomas said. Combined with the witness statements I have hidden, this could put Dane away for life. Then we ride for Santa Fe tomorrow, Catherine declared. But Thomas shook his head. We need one more thing. We need the former sheriff's testimony. He tried to investigate Dane legally. His statement would carry weight with the governor. Silver Creek is 40 miles west, Margaret said. That's a full day's hard riding. Then we leave at dawn. They prepared carefully, knowing this would be their most dangerous journey yet. Dane would be hunting them with everything he had, and the route to Silver Creek was exposed, with few places to hide or take cover. As the others prepared their gear and supplies, Thomas found himself alone with Catherine for a moment, standing outside the bunkhouse under a sky full of stars. Whatever happens tomorrow, Catherine said quietly, I want you to know something. You gave us our lives back. More than that, you gave us hope. For months we've been living in fear, watching everything our parents built get stolen piece by piece. You reminded us we could fight back. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. In the starlight, her face was beautiful, but more than that, strong, determined, alive. You would have fought eventually. With or without me. Maybe. But maybe not. Maybe we would have just kept our heads down until Dane finally destroyed us. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the scent of her hair, dust and leather, and something indefinably her. I've been thinking about what you said. About losing your family, about drifting for 5 years just waiting to die. I lost my parents too. Know what it's like to feel that emptiness. It's a hard thing to carry. Yes. But here's what I realized, grief doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something else. Something stronger. She reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. You came into our lives like a storm, Thomas Webb. And you changed everything. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, some barrier he'd built 5 years ago beginning to crack. I'm not sure I'm good for anyone. I'm a man haunted by ghosts. We're all haunted by something. The question is whether we let it define us or whether we choose to live anyway. Her words struck deep, finding truths Thomas had tried to avoid. He squeezed her hand gently. I'll see this through. Get you and your sisters safe. Make sure Dane answers for his crimes. But after you'll drift away again. Disappear like you appeared. Catherine's voice held sadness but acceptance. I understand. Some men aren't meant to stay in one place. Thomas wanted to deny it but couldn't. He'd been running for so long, he wasn't sure he knew how to stop. So instead of speaking, he simply stood there with Catherine in the starlight, holding her hand and feeling something warm and fragile growing between them, something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Something that terrified him more than any gunfight. They stood together for a long moment before Margaret's voice called from inside, breaking the spell. There were final preparations to make, supplies to check, weapons to clean. The journey ahead would test them all. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky painted in shades of pink and orange that promised heat later in the day. They saddled the horses in silence, each person absorbed in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. Thomas double-checked his weapons, pistol, rifle, knife, and an extra box of ammunition. Catherine did the same, her movements efficient and practiced. The route to Silver Creek took them through some of the roughest country in the territory. Broken badlands cut by dry arroyos, stretches of desert where water was scarce, and narrow passes that would be perfect for ambushes. Thomas studied the terrain as they rode, his military training making him constantly aware of sight lines and potential threats. They'd been riding for about 3 hours when Margaret, who'd been scanning their back trail, suddenly pulled up her horse. Riders! Coming fast! Thomas turned in his saddle, shading his eyes against the morning sun. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles back, he could see dust rising, multiple riders, and they were moving with purpose. How many? Catherine asked. Hard to tell. At least 6, maybe more. Thomas made a quick decision. There's a canyon about a mile ahead. Narrow entrance, high walls. We can defend it if we have to. They urged their horses to a gallop, racing toward the canyon. Behind them, the pursuit continued, the riders gaining ground. Whoever they were, they had fresh horses and were determined. The canyon mouth appeared ahead, a narrow gap between towering red rock walls. Thomas led them inside, then immediately looked for defensible positions. The canyon widened after the entrance, creating a natural arena with walls too steep to climb but offering some cover in the form of fallen boulders and sparse vegetation. Everyone dismount, Thomas ordered. Take cover behind those rocks. Sarah, hold the horses farther back. Margaret, you take the left side. Catherine, you're with me on the right. They moved quickly, taking up positions just as the pursuing riders reached the canyon entrance. There were 8 of them, all heavily armed, led by a man Thomas recognized, Cole, one of Dane's lieutenants, a killer who enjoyed his work. Cole pulled up at the canyon mouth, surveying the situation. He was smart enough not to ride straight into what was obviously a trap. Webb, he called out. We don't have to do this the hard way. Just hand over those papers and the women, and you can ride out alive. Thomas didn't bother answering. Words wouldn't solve this. Cole waited a moment, then shrugged. Your choice. He signaled his men, who began to dismount and spread out, preparing to advance on foot using whatever cover they could find. The first shot came from Margaret. She'd spotted one of Dane's men trying to work his way along the left wall, and fired a warning shot that kicked up dust near his feet. The man dove for cover, and suddenly everyone was shooting. The canyon erupted into a maelstrom of gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off rock walls with high-pitched whines. Gun smoke drifted in the still air, making it hard to see. Thomas fired carefully, making each shot count. Beside him, Catherine did the same, her aim steady despite the chaos. One of Dane's men went down, clutching his leg. Another retreated behind a boulder, pinned by fire from Margaret's position. But Cole's men kept coming, using superior numbers to try to overwhelm the defenders. Thomas realized they couldn't hold this position indefinitely. They had limited ammunition, and sooner or later someone would find a way to flank them. He looked around quickly, spotted a narrow defile in the back wall of the canyon. It might lead to an escape route. Catherine! he called during a lull in the firing. "See that gap in the wall? Take your sisters and the horses. Go now while we've got them pinned. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Those papers are more important than any of us. Get them to Santa Fe." Thomas fired twice more, saw another of Cole's men duck behind cover. "Go!" Catherine hesitated, torn between duty and the growing feelings she had for this man who'd ridden into her life like an answer to a prayer. Then Margaret grabbed her arm. "He's right. We have to get the evidence to safety. That's what matters." Still Catherine hesitated, her eyes locked on Thomas. "Promise me you'll get out." "I promise." Thomas gave her a tight smile. "I've survived worse odds than this." The sisters retreated to where Sarah held the horses, keeping low. Thomas provided covering fire, his shots forcing Cole's men to keep their heads down. Margaret added her fire from the left position, and together they created enough of a distraction for Catherine and Sarah to lead the horses toward the defile. Then something went wrong. One of Cole's men had worked his way up onto a ledge Thomas hadn't noticed, giving him a clear shot at the retreating women. The gunman raised his rifle, taking aim at Catherine's back. Thomas saw it happen as if in slow motion. Without thinking, he broke from cover, sprinting across the open ground. His shout drew the gunman's attention at the last second, the rifle swinging toward him instead. Thomas fired on the run, his bullet taking the man in the chest, but not before the gunman's shot caught Thomas in the side. The impact spun Thomas around. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his ribs. He could hear Catherine screaming his name, but he waved her on urgently. "Go! Get out of here!" Margaret had reached Thomas's position now, helping him back behind cover. Blood soaked his shirt on the left side, but when he probed the wound carefully, he felt relief. The bullet had gouged through the muscle but hadn't hit anything vital. "I'm all right," he told Margaret through gritted teeth. "Just a flesh wound. We need to hold them off a few more minutes." Cole's men, sensing blood, pressed their attack harder. But Catherine and Sarah had made it through the defile with the horses and the precious evidence. That was what mattered. Thomas and Margaret fought from their position with desperate intensity. He was starting to feel lightheaded from blood loss but kept firing, kept moving, making himself a difficult target. Margaret proved to be an excellent shot, her bullets finding their targets with deadly accuracy. Then Thomas heard a sound that changed everything, hoofbeats approaching from behind Cole's position, and shouts in official voices. The Territorial Marshal's patrol had tracked the gunfight and was arriving in force. Cole heard it too. His face twisted with rage, but he knew when to retreat. "Fall back!" he ordered his men. "Move!" Dane's gunmen scattered, mounting their horses and racing away before the Marshal's men could arrive. Within minutes the canyon was filled with blue uniforms and official badges. Captain Williams, the same marshal who'd helped them in Redemption Gulch, dismounted quickly and approached. His eyes widened when he saw Thomas's wound. "You're hit." "I've had worse." Thomas accepted Williams' help in standing, though the movement sent fresh waves of pain through his side. "The women got away with the evidence. They're headed for Silver Creek to find the former sheriff, then on to Santa Fe." "Good. We'll provide escort from here." Williams looked around the canyon, noting the bodies of fallen gunmen. "This is going to end soon, Webb. Dane's making mistakes, getting desperate. Men like that always do in the end." Thomas nodded, but his attention was elsewhere, focused on the defile where Catherine had disappeared. She looked back one last time before vanishing, her face full of fear for him. That look haunted him now. The Marshal's doctor patched Thomas's wound, cleaning it and binding it tight. The bullet had carved a deep furrow along his ribs, but as Thomas had suspected, hadn't done serious damage. He'd be sore for weeks, but he'd survive. "You need rest," the doctor said firmly. "That wound could reopen if you're not careful." But rest was a luxury Thomas couldn't afford. As soon as he could stand without too much dizziness, he mounted his horse. Margaret was ready to ride beside him. "We're going after them," Thomas said to Williams. "Catherine and Sarah are alone out there, and Dane knows where they're headed. Then we ride together, Williams replied. I'm authorized to bring Dane in on federal charges. This ends today, one way or another. They rode out as a group, Thomas, Margaret, and 8 marshals. The pain in Thomas's side was constant, but he pushed it aside. He'd felt worse pain in the war, and more importantly, he'd felt the pain of losing people he cared about. He wouldn't let that happen again. The trail Catherine and Sarah had taken was clear. They'd been moving fast, not trying to hide their tracks. Thomas pushed the pace as hard as he dared, knowing every minute counted. The territory between here and Silver Creek was rough country, with plenty of places for an ambush. They found evidence of the sisters' passage at a narrow pass, fresh droppings from the horses, a scrap of cloth caught on thornbush that Thomas recognized as matching Sarah's dress. They were maybe an hour ahead. Then they heard the gunfire. Thomas spurred his horse forward, ignoring the protests from his wound. They crested a ridge and saw the scene below. Catherine and Sarah had taken cover behind their horses in a small depression, surrounded by 6 riders. Dane's men had caught them. Even as Thomas watched, Catherine fired her rifle, the shot precise and deadly. One of the attacking gunmen fell from his saddle. But the sisters were outnumbered and outgunned, and it was only a matter of time. Spread out and come in from 3 sides, Williams ordered his men crisply. Drive them toward the sisters, we'll catch them in a crossfire. The marshal's men moved into position with military precision. Thomas rode straight down the ridge, his gun drawn, all caution abandoned. He saw Catherine look up, see him coming, her face registering shock and relief in equal measure. The fight was brutal but brief. Caught between the sisters' fire from below and the marshals coming from 3 directions, Dane's men didn't stand a chance. 2 more fell before the others threw down their weapons and surrendered. Thomas dismounted near Catherine, his wound screaming protest, and she ran to him. You're hurt. I saw you go down. I'm fine. Told you I'd make it out. Thomas swayed slightly, and she caught him. You're bleeding again. You idiot, you should have stayed back and rested. Couldn't. Not while you were in danger. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that went beyond words. Margaret and Sarah were safe, gathering supplies from the scattered horses. The marshals were securing the prisoners. But for a moment, Thomas and Catherine were in their own world, connected by something neither could quite name. Why? Catherine asked softly. Why risk your life for us again and again? Thomas considered lying, offering some noble reason about justice or duty. But he'd spent too many years lying to himself. Because I care about you. All of you, but especially. He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. Especially you. Catherine's hand touched his face gently, her fingers tracing the weathered lines there. Then stay. When this is over, don't drift away. Stay with us. Catherine, I'm not. I'm a broken man. I don't know if I can be what you need. I need someone who stands up when it matters. Who fights for what's right even when it costs him everything. Someone who makes me feel safe and strong and valued. Her voice was fierce now. That's you, Thomas Webb. That's exactly you. Before he could respond, Margaret called out. Thomas, Captain Williams wants to talk. The moment passed, but its impact lingered. Thomas walked with Catherine to where the marshal waited, still feeling the warmth of her words. We've got enough now, Williams said. These men will testify against Dane in exchange for reduced sentences. They're hired guns, not true believers. Add that to the documentary evidence you have, plus the former sheriff's testimony, and we can bring formal federal charges. So we still need to reach Silver Creek, Thomas said. Yes, but with a full escort this time. Dane's running out of men and options. His empire is crumbling. Williams looked at the sisters with respect. You 3 have shown remarkable courage through all of this. We had help, Sarah said quietly, glancing at Thomas. They reached Silver Creek the next day without incident. The former sheriff, a grizzled man named Briggs, lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town. When they told him why they'd come, his eyes lit with a fire Thomas recognized, the look of a man who'd been waiting years for vindication. Dane ran me out because I wouldn't look the other way, Briggs said, pulling out a battered journal. I kept notes on everything I found, evidence I collected, witnesses who were too afraid to testify, suspicious deaths I couldn't prove but knew in my gut were murders. Thought maybe someday it would matter. Looks like today's that day. With Briggs' testimony added to everything else, they had an overwhelming case. The marshal arranged for armed transport to Santa Fe, with Thomas, the sisters, and Briggs all traveling under federal protection. The journey to the territorial capital took 5 days. Thomas spent much of that time riding beside Catherine, their conversations deepening as miles passed. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Thomas found himself opening up in ways he hadn't since Emma died, sharing memories and feelings he'd kept locked away. Catherine listened without judgment, offered her own stories in return. She told him about growing up on the ranch, about her father teaching her to rope cattle and her mother teaching her to stand tall even when men tried to make her feel small. She talked about the pain of losing both parents in quick succession and the determination to preserve their legacy. They taught us that land isn't just property, Catherine said as they rode through a mountain pass. It's heritage, identity, a promise to the future. That's why we couldn't let Dane take it. You'll get it back, Thomas assured her. Once he's convicted, all his illegal land acquisitions will be voided. I know. But it's more than the land now. It's about proving that bullies don't always win, that ordinary people can fight back and succeed. She looked at him intently. You showed us that was possible. Santa Fe rose before them on the afternoon of the 5th day, a sprawling town of adobe buildings and dusty streets, larger and more sophisticated than Redemption Gulch, but still bearing the rough edges of frontier life. The territorial governor's mansion stood in the center, a 2-story structure that looked almost palatial compared to the surrounding buildings. Governor Harrison received them immediately, a testament to Captain Williams' influence and the seriousness of the charges. He was a stern man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much frontier injustice. He listened as they laid out their case, examining the documents with increasing anger. This is appalling, the governor said finally, removing his spectacles to rub tired eyes. I knew there was corruption in the territory, but this is systematic, organized criminality on a massive scale. The question is what we do about it, Williams said. Dane has bought influence at every level. Even with all this evidence, his friends might try to protect him. Governor Harrison's jaw set in determination. Not this time. This evidence goes directly to Washington, to the Justice Department. I'll personally ensure it reaches the Attorney General. And I'll issue a federal warrant for Dane's immediate arrest. He won't come quietly, Thomas warned. He's fortified his ranch, surrounded himself with hired guns. Then we go in force. Marshal, assemble every federal officer in the territory. We move at first light tomorrow. That night, the sisters were given rooms in a hotel near the governor's mansion. Proper beds and hot baths, luxuries they hadn't experienced in weeks. Thomas took a room down the hall, though his wound made sleeping difficult. He was sitting by the window, watching the stars, when a soft knock came at his door. Catherine stood in the hallway, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. Couldn't sleep, she said. Neither could I. Thomas stepped back, letting her enter. They sat together in the darkness, either speaking at first. Finally, Catherine broke the silence. Tomorrow it ends. One way or another, this fight with Dane comes to a close. Yes. And then what? For us, I mean. Thomas had been thinking about that question constantly. I don't know. I've spent 5 years as a drifter, never staying anywhere long. The thought of settling down, of having roots again, it scares me. Because you lost everything once and don't want to risk it again. Yes. It was easier to admit in the darkness, where he didn't have to see her face. When Emma and Grace died, it destroyed me. I can't go through that again. Catherine's hand found his. I understand. But here's what I learned through all of this. Running from pain doesn't make it hurt less. It just means you hurt alone. She squeezed his hand gently. I'm not asking for promises, Thomas. I know you're not ready for that. But when this is over, I'm asking you to consider staying. At least for a while. Give yourself a chance to heal, to find out if you can be happy again. Thomas looked at her in the dim starlight, seeing not just beauty but strength, wisdom, and a kindness he didn't think he deserved. I'll think about it, he said quietly. That's all I ask. She left a few minutes later, but the warmth of her presence lingered. Thomas lay in bed for hours, his mind churning with possibilities and fears. For 5 years he'd been a ghost, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. Catherine offered him something precious, a chance to be whole again, to be part of something larger than his own grief. But could he take that chance? Could he risk his heart again, knowing how much it hurt to lose? The question haunted him through the restless night. Dawn broke clear and bright, promising heat later in the day. Governor Harrison had assembled a force of 30 federal marshals, all heavily armed and grim-faced. This wasn't a simple arrest. It was a military operation against a fortified position held by desperate criminals. Thomas volunteered to ride with them despite his still healing wound. The governor tried to refuse, but Captain Williams interceded. Webb knows the territory and he knows Dane's tactics. We need him. So Thomas found himself once again in the saddle, riding toward a confrontation that could end in death. But this time felt different. This time he wasn't just running toward danger to feel something other than emptiness. He was fighting for a future he'd barely dared to hope for. The ride to Dane's ranch took most of the morning. As they approached, Thomas could see that the situation was worse than he'd feared. Dane had turned his ranch into a fortress, men positioned on the roof, barricades erected around the main house, gun ports cut into walls. He'd clearly been preparing for this. Captain Williams surveyed the scene from a safe distance. A direct assault would cost lives. Dane's men have the high ground and good cover. Then we don't assault, Thomas said. We lay siege. Cut off their water supply. There's a creek that feeds their well about a quarter-mile upstream. Without water, in this heat, they won't last more than 2 days. It was a cold strategy, but effective. Williams gave the orders, and marshals moved to control the water source. Other men positioned themselves around the ranch at a safe distance, preventing any escape. Dane's response was defiant. He emerged onto the roof of his mansion, visible to all, and shouted challenges and threats. You have no authority here. I've done nothing wrong. This is persecution by corrupt federal officials. Marcus Dane, Williams called back through a speaking trumpet. You're under arrest for murder, bribery, corruption, and numerous other crimes. Surrender yourself and your men, and you'll face trial. Resist, and we will take you by force. Dane's answer was a rifle shot that kicked up dirt near Williams' position. So be it, the captain said grimly. We wait. The siege began. Hour by hour, the summer heat grew more oppressive. Inside the ranch, men would be growing thirsty, desperate. Thomas watched from his position, remembering similar situations during the war, waiting for an enemy to crack, knowing that time and thirst were better weapons than bullets. By evening, there was movement inside the ranch. Arguments could be heard, voices raised in anger. Dane's hired guns were realizing that dying for their employer's crimes wasn't worth whatever he'd promised to pay them. Then, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, the front door of the ranch house opened. A man emerged with a white cloth tied to his rifle, flag of truce. Dane's men want to talk terms, Williams said. They're willing to surrender if we guarantee they won't hang. What about Dane himself? Still holed up inside with 3 loyal men. But he's losing control. The negotiations took an hour. In the end, most of Dane's gunmen agreed to surrender and testify against him in exchange for reduced sentences. They filed out with hands raised, defeated and thirsty. That left Dane and his 3 closest men alone in the ranch house. Williams gave them one more chance to surrender peacefully. Come out with your hands up, and you'll face justice in a courtroom. Force us to come in, and people will die. Dane's response was characteristically defiant. Come and get me, then. I'm not going to hang for crimes I didn't commit. Williams looked at Thomas. Your call. You know this place better than any of us. Thomas studied the ranch house, remembering the layout from when he and Catherine had broken in to steal the ledgers. There was a weakness: the study window on the east side, the same one they'd used before. 3 men from that window, Thomas said. While you make noise at the front door, drawing their attention. We slip in, surprise them from behind. It was risky, but so was a direct assault. Williams agreed, selecting 2 of his best men to accompany Thomas. As darkness fell complete, they moved into position. Thomas's wound ached terribly, but he pushed the pain aside. This ended tonight, one way or another. Williams and most of his men made a show of preparing to breach the front door, shouting orders, moving equipment, creating noise and distraction. While Dane and his remaining men focused on that threat, Thomas and his 2 companions scaled the wall to the study window. The window was locked this time, but a Jimmy broke it quietly. They slipped inside, guns drawn. Thomas could hear voices from the main room, Dane shouting orders, his men nervous and trigger-happy. Thomas led the way down the dark hallway, every sense alert. They were almost to the main room when a floorboard creaked under his foot. Instantly, gunfire erupted. The next few minutes were chaos, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness, the deafening roar of guns in close quarters, men shouting and cursing. Thomas fired twice, saw one of Dane's men go down. The marshals with him took down another. Then Thomas found himself face to face with Marcus Dane. The rancher's face was twisted with rage and fear, his gun leveled at Thomas's chest. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other. You ruined me, Dane hissed. I'd built an empire, and you destroyed it. You destroyed yourself, Thomas replied calmly. By forgetting that power has to have limits. By thinking you could hurt innocent people without consequences. Those women deserve to hang. They refused to sell what was rightfully mine. It was never yours. And they'll live long, happy lives, while you rot in prison. Dane's finger tightened on the trigger. Thomas saw it coming, started to move. The gun fired, but Thomas had already thrown himself aside. His own shot, fired from a prone position, took Dane in the leg. The rancher went down screaming. It was over. Dane's last man surrendered immediately, and Captain Williams burst through the front door to find the situation under control. They dragged Dane out in chains, still screaming about injustice and persecution. The marshals loaded him into a wagon for transport back to Santa Fe. As they did, Thomas stood aside, suddenly exhausted. His wound had reopened, blood seeping through the bandages. But they'd won. Dane was captured, his empire destroyed, his reign of terror ended. Catherine was waiting in Santa Fe when they returned 3 days later. She ran to Thomas as he dismounted, not caring who saw, and threw her arms around him. He held her tight, ignoring the pain in his side, feeling something inside him finally begin to heal. It's over, he told her. Dane's in custody, awaiting trial. His land acquisitions will be reversed. Your ranch is yours again. Catherine pulled back, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief and joy. We can go home? You can go home. She caught the distinction immediately. What about you? Thomas had been thinking about this moment for days, knowing it would come, dreading it. I don't know. Part of me wants to ride away, keep drifting like I have been. It's what I know, what feels safe. And the other part? The other part wants to stay. Wants to build something with you, see where this goes between us. He cupped her face gently. But I'm afraid, Catherine. Afraid of getting close and losing everything again. I'm afraid too, she admitted. I'm afraid you'll leave. But you know what I learned through all of this? Sometimes you have to be brave enough to be afraid. To risk pain for the chance at something beautiful. Thomas looked into her eyes and saw his future there, uncertain, challenging, but full of possibility. He thought of Emma and Grace, knew they would want him to live, to love again, to be happy. They wouldn't want him spending the rest of his life as a ghost. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "At least for a while. See if a drifter can learn to be still." Catherine's smile was like sunrise. "That's all I ask?" The trial of Marcus Dane became the biggest news in the territory. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony damning. Dane was convicted on 14 counts including murder, bribery, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to hang. Throughout the proceedings, Thomas sat in the courtroom, watching justice finally served. Beside him, Catherine and her sisters bore witness. They'd fought hard for this moment, risked everything, and they'd won. When it was over, when Dane had been led away to await execution, Thomas and the sisters walked out into bright sunshine. They stood together for a moment, not speaking, simply absorbing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. "What now?" Sarah asked. "Now we rebuild," Catherine said. "We go home, fix what Dane destroyed, make the ranch prosper again." "And you?" Margaret looked at Thomas. "What will you do?" Thomas met Catherine's eyes, saw hope there mixed with lingering fear that he might still leave. "I thought I might try ranching," he said. "If you're hiring." "We are," Catherine said softly. "We definitely are." The journey back to their ranch took a week, traveling at an easy pace. The urgency that had driven them for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and possibility. Thomas rode beside Catherine, their hands occasionally brushing, their conversations deepening with each passing day. The ranch, when they reached it, bore scars from Dane's harassment: burned buildings, broken fences, neglected fields. But the land was still good, the water still flowed, and with hard work, it could be restored. They threw themselves into that work with determination. Thomas proved to have a talent for ranch management, his military organizational skills translating well to running a large operation. He rebuilt fences, repaired buildings, brought in new livestock to replace what Dane had stolen or destroyed. But more than the physical work, Thomas was rebuilding himself. Day by day, hour by hour, he was learning to let go of grief and embrace life again. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when he woke from nightmares about Emma and Grace, still moments when guilt threatened to overwhelm him. Catherine was patient through it all, giving him space when he needed it, offering comfort when he'd accept it. She understood loss, understood the long road to healing. Together, they navigated the complicated territory between friendship and something deeper. 6 months after Dane's trial, on a clear spring evening with wildflowers blooming across the valley, Thomas asked Catherine to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of the rebuilt ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I know I'm not an easy man," Thomas said. "I'm scarred and broken in ways that might never fully heal. But I love you, Catherine. You brought me back to life when I was ready to give up. I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy." Catherine's eyes shone with tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married a month later in a simple ceremony attended by everyone from Redemption Gulch and beyond. Former Governor Harrison came, as did Captain Williams and many of the marshals who'd helped bring Dane to justice. Even the elderly bookkeeper Peterson made the journey, tears streaming down his face as he watched the couple exchange vows. Thomas stood at the altar, looking into Catherine's eyes as she spoke her promises, and felt the last pieces of his broken heart finally knit back together. He wasn't the same man he'd been before losing Emma and Grace. That innocence could never be recovered. But he was whole again in a different way, strengthened by suffering, deepened by loss, made wiser by pain. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under Thomas and Catherine's management, becoming known throughout the territory for quality cattle and fair dealing. Margaret and Sarah both married, finding good men who joined the family operation. The ranch grew, expanded, became a symbol of what honest work and integrity could build. Thomas never forgot his first family, kept their memory alive in quiet ways, a photograph on the mantel, stories told to the children who eventually came. But he was no longer defined by that loss. He'd learned that love wasn't a finite resource, that honoring the past didn't mean refusing the future. Catherine bore him 3 children over the years, 2 daughters and a son. Thomas was terrified throughout each pregnancy, haunted by fears of loss. But Catherine was strong, and each child arrived healthy and squalling. Thomas held each baby with trembling hands, marveling that life could offer second chances. On summer evenings, the extended family would gather on the porch, Thomas and Catherine, Margaret and Sarah with their husbands, children running through the yard, dogs barking, the sound of laughter carrying across the valley. In those moments, Thomas would look around at everything he'd helped build and feel profound gratitude. The story of the hanging that never was became legend in the territory. People told it to their children, embellished it in taverns, used it as inspiration when they faced their own battles against injustice. But for Thomas and Catherine, it wasn't legend, it was the crucible that had forged their lives together. As Thomas grew older, his hair turning white and his body feeling the accumulated wear of hard living, he never regretted the choice he'd made that day in Redemption Gulch. Riding into town, stopping the execution, fighting Dane, all of it had led here, to this life, to this family, to this love. Catherine aged beside him with grace, her sharp mind never dulling, her strength never fading. They grew old together, watching their children grow, helping raise grandchildren, building a legacy that would outlast them both. On quiet nights, they would sit on their porch and watch the stars, hands linked, comfortable in the silence of two people who'd shared decades together. Sometimes they talk about the old days, the desperate flight through the mountains, the evidence that brought down an empire, the moment when Thomas had realized he loved her. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked one such night, when they were both well into their 60s. "Giving up the wandering life to stay here with me?" Thomas considered the question seriously, as he always did her queries. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd kept drifting. Where I'd have gone, what I'd have seen." He squeezed her hand gently. "But then I look at what we built together, this ranch, our family, our life, and I know I made the right choice. You saved me, Catherine. Just as surely as I saved you from that gallows. We saved each other," she corrected gently. "That's what love is, two broken people helping each other heal." Years continued their steady march. Thomas and Catherine watched their children take over more of the ranch operations, gracefully stepping back to advisory roles. They took pride in seeing the next generation carry forward the values they'd fought so hard to preserve: integrity, courage, justice, compassion. When Thomas died at 73, peacefully in his sleep with Catherine beside him, half the territory came to the funeral. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree where he'd loved to sit and watch the sunset. The marker was simple: Thomas Webb. He stood when it mattered. Catherine lived 5 more years, active and sharp until the very end. When she joined Thomas on that hillside, her marker read, "Catherine Webb. She never stopped fighting." Their children and grandchildren carried on the ranch, maintained the legacy, told the stories. The land prospered through generations, a living testament to what two people could build when they chose courage over fear, love over loss, hope over despair. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light was just right, ranch hands would swear they could see 2 figures sitting on the old porch, a weathered man and a strong woman, hands linked, watching the sunset together, their love enduring beyond death, beyond time, eternal as the land itself.